Well, hello, everyone. I just want to take some time and go over the lecture for this week. As I stated to the class, I did not record the class. We talked about some various things uh, regarding violence, corrections, and abuse. We went in depth on a few areas, but since the test does pull heavily from this chapter, wanted to be able to go through some of this information and have this up as a video, but also include the PowerPoint on the module so that you can go through a few things as well. And also, let's be honest, that whole awkward thing of the that recording always saying, this meeting is being recorded, just a little weird at times. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. This week, we are talking about violence, corrections, and abuse. This is a large chapter, and we're going to go through several main areas. It is a flyover. We're going to drill down on a few things. There are some things that that I will highlight as we go through that the test will and the book will draw out a little bit more on, and I encourage you to go into those on your own time. All right, so forensic human services, this is what we're talking about here. It focuses on that intersection between human services, the human service professional, legal, judicial, corrections, all of those things. It often requires training, extra training in other fields such as crisis counseling. It may be dealing with rape or abuse victims, things of those nature. So there's a whole bunch of other training that can go on. Also, there might be some training on some of the legal end for some of those aspects as well. First, the thing to do is to define intimate partner violence. Intimate partner violence is kind of short for what used to be called domestic violence, domestic abuse. But it's changing over to intimate partner violence to cover a broader scope. But this covers several different definitions. We want to go into those. These are all on the test. So physical violence, that's kind of obvious. That would be the physical contact. So it could be hitting someone like this here. But I want you to know that it can also very much, it can be a person threatening someone with physical violence. Again, there is also sexual violence. Now, sexual violence, this is defined as forced penetration, psychological or coercion for unwanted sex, unwanted contact, forced to watch pornography, or filmed while engaging in the sex activity. So if we went with several instances, like we went over, if a landlord says, hey, how about for rent, you pay me sex instead of cash, and we'll work out an arrangement, and we'll come to that. Is that an example of sexual violence? While that may not spring to mind as violent in our minds, that actually is an example of sexual violence, as in that you have coercion. Someone is coerced into unwanted sex. Here's another example. Here you can kind of decide here, yes or no. At a friend's house, Jacob goes over to a friend's house and they all start watching hardcore pornography. Jacob doesn't want to at all, but he stays there in the room with his friends, kind of a peer pressure sort of thing. So the question would be, is that an example of sexual violence? The answer would be no, because Jacob is not forced. There's no evidence of the room being locked there, or that someone is actually like holding him down, making him watch things. It's an example of peer pressure. It's not cool, but it doesn't fall under the exact definition of sexual violence. Another situation would be if a guy at a frat house sets up a camera in his bedroom and secretly films the women that he has sex with. Is that an example of sexual violence? Actually, yes, it is. Because someone is being filmed without permission. Now, if you take the same guy at the frat house and he flies a drone outside of a window of the girls' dorm watching them change, And we're in the age of drones, so where there were some clear-cut laws regarding things like security cameras and where they could be aimed, drones that can get a little fuzzy at times. So they're still working out some of those things. Um, that actually kind of goes into a little bit of a gray area at first until we look at the definition. The definition says forced penetration, psychological or coercion to unwanted sex, unwanted contact, forced to watch pornography, or filmed while engaging in the sex activity. If he's got the drone there and he's looking in and the girls are changing, I'm sorry, that's not, and they're not engaged in the sex act, then obviously that does not fall under the definition of sexual violence. It does fall in under the definition of invasion of privacy, peeping Tom laws. So the guy's looking at 6 months in jail and $1,000 fine at least. So it falls under the purview of other laws, just not this one right here. Sexual violence also be, but it does have this connotation, I'm sorry, of forced, or someone being psychologically or coerced into unwanted sex, the unwanted contact, forced to watch porn, or film while engaging in the sex activity without permission. So all of these fall under the definition of sexual violence. Stalking. Stalking is a pattern of repeated and unwanted contact or harassment. So if a creepy guy stares at a girl in the gym, like when she goes there, is that stalking per se? Well, until it's become a pattern and maybe it's addressed and informed to this person, hey, what you're doing, it's unwanted, back off or whatever. Until that happens, the answer would be no. But it is creepy. So this would be where some third parties and witnesses would really come to bear on this. It is activity that could develop into what would fall under stalking, but at that time it isn't. And then there's the famous case of the woman who wound up inside David Letterman's home after sending him a bunch of letters and contacting him and all these other things. Is that an example of stalking? Oh yeah, it's a little out there. In addition to this, we also have psychological aggressions, which is name calling, intimidation, put downs, etc. It's done to tear down and control a person, and often it will go with some of these other things in the range of relationships. So let's see. So there's a quote that's in your book when it starts to talk about abusers themselves. Please check this quote out and read that section on abusers. The quote says, abusers plagued with fears, they will be abandoned, taken advantage of, and humiliated, exhibit jealousy and possessiveness, and then the accusations begin. So one thing you might want to ask yourself is, you think this is while this could be a sort of a profile of an abuser, do you think it's the only one out there? Do you think that there's other issues that might fuel abuse as opposed to this part here, the fear of being abandoned, taken advantage of, humiliated? So if we're talking about intervention when it comes to these scenarios, first of all is finding out if a person is ready for intervention and finding out where on that continuum. And one way to do that is to listen to the blame. If someone is blaming a person for the violence that they've experienced, someone's coming in and they're all made up and something like that, and they're blaming a person in someone that they're in a relationship with, then chances are they're more on the ready side to move forward in that continuum. If they come in and they're blaming the circumstances around, oh, well, my partner had a hard day at work. My partner's just been having a rough time for a while. My partner's had a close family member that passed away, and this is how they're dealing with grief and stuff. If they're making excuses and pointing to circumstances around, then they're more towards the side of the continuum where they're not as ready for help. And all this kind of goes into actually looking at the strengths-based approach. So if they come in, yes, there's the affirmation of affirming them, hey, great job. You've come in, you've taken this first step. This is wonderful. And that affirmation of that right there can play into to the strength-based approach. In the strength-based approach as well is asking them what their story is, not only affirming them as they've started, but also what their story is, what happened. In that what happened, you'll find a number of issues come out, but you should also be able to find, if you listen carefully, some of the strengths that they might have. Maybe they have family members that live in a different part of the state. Maybe some of that shelter could the shelter component of that may be uh, that may be able to be addressed. It could be that the person just is saying repeatedly that they're tired of it, that they're ready to act, they're ready to get out. That alone is a strength because they're ready to take advantage of several resources. And so for this, the empowerment process model is a good model here. Clients set goals to take action to achieve the goals. Okay, simple enough. Now we'll talk about goal setting and everything else when it comes to 103, but the empowerment process model kind of goes, it kind of takes a step back and says, hey, people need wins. And so for a person to get a win, what we want to do, instead of like making a huge long-term goal, let's make short little tiny step goals. So if the person comes in and say there's a woman that's coming in and she has several bruises across her face, bruising across her arm, maybe a broken arm or something like that, and she's seen medical treatment, but now she's seeing you. Then by using the empowerment process model, maybe coupled with some other models as well, but using the empowerment process model, once you're talking to her, finding out story and getting some strengths, you start to move into where you set a short-term goal, a very small goal. So what you would say is you would affirm, hey, here's the steps in the process. And you may line that out, which is, number one, coming to get help. Okay, you've done step one. Number two, telling your story. Oh, wow, you've done step two. See, you've done great here. Number three, taking advantage of resources. And so, maybe you have a specific resource in there. So instead of telling the person, hey, here's the link, go and apply for this on your phone when you get a chance here, what you would do using the empowerment process model is actually sit there and go through the application with them. Probably many places would have you do anyway, but go through the application with them. And then as you do that and you get down to the end, it's like, okay, see, look, you've already done this third step here. You are actually on the way, committed. You are in a place now where you're on the radar for some services, and we can start moving forward. And you can really affirm a person in that way. So that would be, there's some examples that you could do to use this. The GROW model of, you can use that with coaching and counseling. GROW model is an acronym: GROW, G-R-O-W, G standing for goals, R for the reality and resources, where you're letting the person in their story define the reality of their situation, but also looking for some resources as well. It's looking for some of those strengths that they have. Then the O would stand for obstacles and options. Obstacles, very plainly, you're saying, okay, here's the things that are standing in your way. And the options, you're also problem solving and looking at the workarounds. Finally, the W would be the what you're going to do about it. And that's the setting the goal to move forward. And if you couple that with the empowerment process model, that goal would be very small, but it would be a goal that would link back to the things that you've brought out in your previous conversation with the person. Now, intervention with batterers. Straight from the test, what does Duluth say? I was hoping that you would remember it just because of this picture. But then again, maybe not. If you look up Duluth in the book, when Duluth is talking about batterers, please go through that area there. Duluth goes on with social learning, telling us that violence is an intentional act. We've asked the question, hey, is that true? And in this situation of intimate partner violence, yes, it is true. Now in the criminal justice system, they might talk about, unintentional, premeditated, all those other things. But as far as we're concerned right now, yes, definitely. Violence is an intentional act. Domestic violence as a whole uses force and intimidation to control and maintain a relationship. Uh, all those things will come out as red flags when you're speaking with people, when you're interacting with people. Using violence then is a learned behavior and can be unlearned. So when you go back to Duluth has this model where he's saying, okay, violence is intentional. Okay, so if it's intentional, we can see, okay, if there's that point where you are deciding, we need to address what's leading up to that decision, address some of the issues behind the issues, and where's that snowball. The domestic violence using force and intimidation to control and maintain a relationship, we need to address how that person is viewing relationship. They're viewing it as something to control, maintain, instead of partnership. And so it's a matter of a paradigm shift, a shifting of a point of view of a person. So some of the programming, some of the uh, uh, some of the ways you'd be dealing with a person would be addressing that. Finally, using violence as a learned behavior and can be unlearned, and that's kind of your goal. That's the one possibility that you're keeping in your mind, because you're saying, hey, if it's something that can't be unlearned, then why am I doing this anyway? I'm never going to be successful in intervening with matters. But if you're saying, hey, it's learned, it can be unlearned. And when we talk about violence being learned, we can go back and we can look at a few things. You look through your book on this about boys who witness interparent violence are more likely to perpetuate it. Girls who witness interparent violence are more likely to enter into those same relationships. So the cycle continues just on and on and on. And perhaps one thing that came out in discussion, perhaps one reason why people will continue that cycle is because it's familiar. The unknown, treating someone, partner, respect, or not focusing on the control and intimidation, that's all unknown. But the familiar, what they've learned, is here. And for someone to venture outside the familiar into the unknown, it's often very, very difficult. Another question that's going to come up on the test is this one. What is rape? So please look at the definition of rape. Also, it would be to your advantage to look at what it said about the CDC study. The CDC had a number of things that came up about it. And let's see, I will put there's the results of the CDC study right there. And that is 1 in 5 women have experienced completed or attempted rape in a lifetime, 1 in 3 between ages of 11 and 17, 1 in 8 before age 10, 1 in 38 men have experienced completed or attempted rape. 1 in 4 of those between 11 and 17, 1 in 4 before age 10. Now, what's important about these numbers is that the CDC study, which is a national study where a lot of these numbers were taken from, unfortunately, some of the questions that were asked were just a little misleading, especially when it came to some areas of sexual contact and intoxication. Now, rape can happen. It can be forced. It can be psychologically. It can be You can be forced physically, psychologically. There could be coercion involved, and there's also rape of the incapacitated, which that includes an intoxicated scenario. However, in the CDC study was the question of have you had a sexual encounter while intoxicated? So when the study was given out to people, you had people who say you have John and Jane Doe, and they have been married for 20 years, and they went out on their 20th anniversary, and they got a little tipsy, had a little bit too much champagne and stuff, and then celebrating their anniversary, they had sex. So, according to the question that the CDC asked, there would be people who would say, "Oh, have I had sex while intoxicated?" "Oh, well, sure, yeah, it was our 20th anniversary, honey. Remember that one?" And they would mark yes. Unfortunately, this kind of skews the study. So There are some other studies, and in fact, some of your state studies will then become a little bit more accurate, especially when it comes to men. Remember that all rape reports are rapes are underreported anyway. But just a real quick look on Indiana showed that 40% of women have experienced rape or sexual assault in their lifetime. 26.8% of men uh, have experienced rape or sexual assault in their lifetime. This actually is probably closer to a truer number. And while it is higher than the CDC numbers, um, just the CDC questioning kind of threw off a few little things. So I encourage you, if you're looking up numbers, to look at some recent studies, particularly those as it occurs with your state, the state that you are in. So now when you're working with victims of violent crimes, there are a few things to keep in mind. Oh, I'm sorry. One thing that you will want to know, the discussion in your book, there is a discussion in your book of uh, different sorts of rapes. Of course, the male on female, female on male rape, and then the male on male rape. Each one having their own sorts of uh, their own different sorts of issues that go with it. This isn't like a cookie cutter type of solution here, and it's not a cookie cutter scenario. People experience this differently, and it's then becomes radically different when you're looking to some experiences and some of the things that people deal with when it comes to both men and women. Um, there are men tend to exacerbate or tend to really focus on the feelings of shame and that they were not strong enough to fight off. Uh, and there's other experiences that will go along with that. Please take the time to read that and check up on that in your book for some of the differences with rape, male, female, male, male, and female, male. All right, so working with victims of violent crimes, there's this tension of innocent until proven guilty, which is the law, and then also the victims' rights services. Human services will often be working with the victims' rights. Your goal is to help people wade through the present, help them prepare for what's next, and then point to future resolution. And this is all very, very important. Um, the process that you would be going through is, here's the example of the entire process. The incident happened, charges are filed, there's trial or plea, sentencing is scheduled. You are coming in, actually throughout this whole thing, but with the victim, there's the victim impact statement. Victims' rights advocacy groups have really pressed for in recent times the whole idea of victim impact statements, and they're very good. I think it provides resolution for people and hits the accused up with some reality in some places where where offenders need to become more aware of the human cost. And you can see where this, if you've ever seen an impact statement read in a courtroom, you could experience that. But yes, is one reason why you will need English 111, because you've got to help someone get across what they are trying to say. And obviously, it's a very, very rough time for them. So you being able to come in and help them articulate that is a huge, huge help. Some of the things that you're going to be, that you might be helping with, looking at funeral arrangements, might be dealing with CPS. Some of the skills you'll need, number one is be present. Be present, but be present widely. Wade in their pain without drowning in it. We'll talk later on about having that emotional slicker to where you're letting some things go off. And also, don't be a lone ranger. Get everybody else in that you can. You want to get some other services as well, whether this is getting clergy, whether this is, I mean, you will already obviously be with some other caseworkers and stuff, um, but clergy, funeral directors are excellent resources, particularly some funeral directors as you're walking through some of the funeral prep and uh, some of the wherefores and all that you got to have. um, why you have to have a death certificate, how can you go about getting a death certificate. These types of questions will come up. uh, Funeral directors are awesome for this. Many of them will actually have some lists that you can access and will help you in times like these. Also, you will need to have some patience. People are never a one and done type thing. We all tend to spiral or come back around uh, as we continue to work through things. We also seem to be in process, right? So let's move on to working with offenders and prisons. Why are prisons so full? One of the big answer. This is actually a question on the test. Uh, right along this, and one of the big reasons is because of the war on drugs. Uh, and human services professionals, social workers, we're all on one side saying, hey, 70% of your people in there are on drug related charges, and a lot of those are in there just because of things like possession or paraphernalia or something like that. So why have that going on, when you can have can we tier this out? Can we introduce things like drug court, which can we talk about expungement, for when people get out? Uh, these are all things that need to be addressed. Do we need to throw each and every person in jail with some hardcore career criminals if they just, were maybe if they had paraphernalia, or if they had um, a small amount of a drug on them? Is there something else that we can do, some other kind of diversion that we can do so our prisons are not so full, and uh, and we can address some of the major issues that are in our prisons today? Please know the definition of this word for the test: recidivism. And it's that whole concept of the revolving door, that someone goes out of prison and then commits a crime and returns. What is the recidivism rate? You'll hear that often. Is it 65%, where 65% of your, two out of three of your people leave and then are back uh, rather soon as they have committed another crime? So uh, you'll want to look at that. There are many programs that will address some things for prisoners, because especially someone that's been in a long time, when they get out, we're talking a major uh, case of not only culture shock, but I mean, their entire life has changed, and they realize entire life has passed them by, and they have to forge a new life. So um, we want to be able to reform. The goal of the prison system should be to reform instead of just in prison, just punishment. If it's just penitential with punishment, if it's just punishment in nature, um, then obviously we're not going to cut down that recidivism rate. It's just a roof over their heads, confinement, and three squares, 3 square meals a day. So there are several programs that are going on. There's some that are in your modules. There's video also, not only for a couple of them, but this one that's in Indiana Women's Prison. They also work in men's prison as well, but the Indiana Women's Prison, ICANN, is a big one. Train service dogs for a variety of different areas. Service dogs, therapy dogs, facility dogs. Offenders will train these animals, and then they can make them available to the public. Now, this drastically reduces the cost to about, I'm going to say about 15%, 10 to 15% of what most service dogs would cost. So it actually makes it a service dog available. to many people who otherwise would not have that ability, would not have that would not be able to do that. They're also very big on doing facility dogs, so dogs for schools, um, and maybe some workplaces, things of that nature. Really good. Um, and the studies, the science is out there showing what benefits uh, working dogs can be in these situations. So um, that's some of the things that this program does. Now you may think, okay, well, how does training a dog? I mean, I know it gets them a skill, but I mean, is it really a marketable skill? Well, yes, they've had some graduates of the program who have then come out and have gone on to do some amazing things. Some of them, whether they're working as groomers at places, whether they're working with, as vet techs. There have been two that have started their own grooming businesses, and one of them that has started a mobile grooming business. And then there's also one from the men's prison. His name is Sean. He was really good with dogs, and so he actually got some more education. Came back, he started working for the organization. He now has access to go into prisons and deal with inmates, and it's just like VIP access. I mean, it's an act of Congress to get in sometimes, but Sean's able to go in and do a lot of things, able to help out a lot of people, and so with that, he's also moved on into helping with fundraising, troubleshooting, does speaking engagements, things of that nature. And so for these sorts of things, you want to say, okay, anything that we can do to help make it so that people make it on the outside. Now, see that recidivism. Out of everything we look at with prisons, we will cut down numbers if we can cut down that recidivism. And we have them there, whole captive audience thing. So what you need to think of, what are some ways that you can do that we can help offenders make it on the outside. There's talk of teaching more life skills. Indianapolis Women's Prison, actually here recently, you can look up MC Hammer, visiting Indianapolis Women's Prison. He was part of an initiative that was teaching coding, computer coding to women in prison. Now, can they get jobs doing this? Well, depends on their offense. For example, if anyone had any sort of identity theft or anything like that, you're never getting a job with a computer, period. I can guarantee you that. But there are a whole host of other offenses that it really doesn't matter. You can get a job working with computers. So teaching them coding, teaching them a number of skills or trades. There's a program that went on where 19 women were chosen, and there's an Ivy Tech campus that sponsored a welding program for them. Two of them got really nice jobs when they got out. I have not followed the other 17. They were all slated like in their last year of prison, and they were like working, sort of a halfway transitions to where they were going to be getting out. And so I've not checked back in on the other 17, but getting ASW certifications for welding gave them a marketable skill to where they could go and get jobs, get work at a lucrative career, and some are making some good money, which is great. And it's those types of things that we need to look at. Another thing that you can do as a human service professional, what you'll be doing more and more of, we'll be seeing more and more of, is advocating to area businesses. In advocating to area businesses and saying, hey, this is what's out there. There's a workforce that is here for people who have been reformed, rehabilitated. Is there more that we can do so that these people don't experience this revolving door? Everybody makes mistakes. Can we get a second chance here? And with the drain on today's workforce and that Indiana in particular is experiencing, and skilled workers are needed, the idea of actually having some, a workforce that can be invested in, but they can hold accountable as well, is great. the Pathways to Employment program that's set up by Belden. I encourage you to check that out. That one works with people in recovery, uh, often people who will have some felonies as well. And that one works as a transition back into society. Because if we don't get that transition back into society, right, well, then that recidivism number is going to remain high. And that's going to be a real issue for everyone. So I hope you got a few things out of this. Please take a look at the PowerPoint. There's several things in there. Also, when I send out the study guide for the exam, please take a look at that as well. There'll be a number of things in there for you to go through for this last test. Want everyone to do well. If you have a test or a discussion board out or anything like that, please take the time to go ahead and get this in now. It does need to be in and done. Remember, the literature review assignment, the rewrite, will need to be submitted by midnight tonight. And I will go back and you can earn some more points there. All you need to do is add the parts that you have missed or maybe refine some APAs, some things of that nature. Do not submit it over your old one, but submit it under the literature rewrite assignment tab. All right, thanks a lot.